got quite a few people joining us today, which is brilliant. But we'll get started because I don't want us to run over. We've got quite a lot to cover today. So, hello everyone. If we haven't met before, my name is Amy. I'm very pleased to be able to welcome you this morning to this Church Urban Fund or CUF session online, driving your responses to poverty with data. So we're going to be taking a deep dive into the CUF lookup tool, and we're going to see how it can resource you in your churches to know more about the community that you're living in and serving, the people that are part of your church, and better know how to take action, really. But before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping for us, if I can move us along. So first of all, please do introduce yourself in the chat. Somewhere on your screen, you should be able to see a chat button. Should look like little speech bubbles. It might be at the top of your screen if you're on a tablet or phone. It might be near the bottom, like me, if you're on a big screen like a computer or a laptop. But it should say chat. You click on that. It'll be lovely to hear who you are. So where in the country you're from, perhaps. If you're joining from a church or an organisation, that would be great to hear. Yeah, I can see quite a few familiar names popping up, so it would be nice to say hello to each other in the chat to get started. Secondly, this session is being recorded this morning, but don't worry, if you do say anything, you won't be visible on the recording. Your faces won't be recorded. And we will send you that recording afterwards. You have it, you can watch it back, or you can send it to someone else who might be interested. It will also be put up on our website, so you can direct people there as well. And a final bit of housekeeping for us before we get started is questions. So I'm sure questions will come to mind as we're going through this morning. As they do, please pop them into the chat. Yeah, again, if you're just joining, we're just introducing ourselves in the chat at the moment. If you have questions that come into your mind as we go through, do pop them into the chat. And we will aim to allow a little bit of time towards the end of our session to pick up those questions and answer them. So today, I am delighted that we have with us two experts in the field of data around poverty and deprivation. So we are joined by our own expert at CUF, Sophie Edwardson, and she is our Listening and Learning Officer, as well as Dr. Ken Eames. He is the Senior Statistical Researcher at the Church of England Data Services team. So together they are going to take us on a bit of a journey through statistics this morning. And whether you're someone who really likes stats and data, or that's not normally your cup of tea, don't worry, you'll be in very safe hands with them both. So thank you both, Sophie and Ken. And I will hand over to you, Sophie, first of all, I believe, to tell us a bit about the lookup tool itself.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Amy, and hello everyone. It's so nice to see you here this morning, and I'm really pleased to be able to share a little bit more about our CUF lookup tool, how it might be helpful to you, your church, or parish in some of the work you do. So just having a look around the CUF lookup tool initially. So when you go onto the CUF lookup tool page, you'll be able to see a search bar, and there you can begin to type in your parish name and locate your parish profile really within the lookup tool, which will give you some more data and background, some of the information that we have in the lookup tool for your parish. And essentially the lookup tool will provide you with a deprivation ranking for your parish out of all the parishes, the 12,000 plus in the Church of England. And it will also do that on a graphic, which I'll show you in the next slide, so you can get a bit more of a sense of where that situates you within all of the Church of England parishes. And then there's some additional variables as well to get a little bit more sense of the variables around poverty and some additional demographics in your parish. And the CUF, the current data sources of the CUF lookup tool are the 2021 census, which is available every 10 years, and the most recent edition being the 2021 version. the 2019 indices of deprivation. This is the most up-to-date version available, and that is updated every 5 years, but it's expected to be updated potentially in 2026 at the moment. I don't know if that's to do with COVID or any delays on that side, but we have the most up-to-date deprivation data from the indices of multiple deprivation in the tool at the moment. And we have parish boundaries as of October 2023. And all this data is shared with us by the data services team at COV. So we're really pleased to have Ken with us today from the data services team to share a bit more about the background and how they draw out that data and map that at parish level. So just moving on to the next slide, if possible, Amy. So after you've found your parish within the lookup tool, you'll be presented, and I've drawn an example here from Taunton St Andrews. You'll be able to see your parish population, which is taken from the 2021 census data. You'll be able to see your parish ranking. So currently, as of October 2023, there's 12,239 parishes in the Church of England, and you'll be able to draw out a ranking where 1 is the most deprived parish and 239th is the most affluent, shall we say. And then you'll also be able to see a corresponding statement and graphic, which can really help in interpreting the parish ranking. So that's just an example there from Taunton St Andrews. You can see the scale, you can see that note to population, and also the ranking within the parishes, with Taunton being 3,062nd. And then just looking at some of the other variables that the tool can provide you with, we have some information, some additional information about poverty. And this data is available from the Index of Multiple Deprivation 2019. And the 3 that we have are some information around child poverty, working age poverty, and pensioner poverty. And on the tool, this is a screenshot, so you can't see currently, but on the tool, when you hover over that dotted line, which situates your parish, you'll be able to see the percentage score for your parish, and also within that graphic you'll be able to see the least and most in the diocese, which can help you just interpreting where you sit within that diocese. You can do a little bit of a sense check as well from what you see or hear, what you've experienced within your parish, and just see how that looks compared to your own experience being within that parish and the knowledge you have of your local area. And the next slide would be great, Amy. Just looking now at the demographic variables that are also available in the tool. So we've got the poverty ones, and we also have some more information around demographics. These are drawn from the 2021 census data, and we have level of qualifications, no qualification. We have social housing, we have older population, and we have ethnic diversity. And similarly with the poverty graphics, if you just scroll over where the dotted line is, you can see your percentage score and then where you rank within or where you're situated within the diocese, and you can do a little bit of sense checking around that as well. And the final thing within the tool is a parish data table that we have available. This is really helpful in drawing all that information together in and one table, looking at where your parish ranking is for all those variables that we've touched on, looking at the most and the least in the diocese for a little bit of sense checking there, and also the most and least in the nation. So that national comparison data can be very helpful as well to look at where you sit kind of nationally as a parish. We find that table as well, just having it laid out like that can really help make the data kind of more accessible, see where you're situated as a parish, and also for that further sense checking which is available. Amy, if it's possible to go to the next slide. And just looking then at applications for the tool. So you have your data, you can get a bit of an idea of where you sit within the diocese or at a national comparison for those, that ranking of where you are with deprivation ranking, with the poverty variables that we have and with the demographic variables that we have. And people have gone on to use the tool and that data in a number of different ways. They found it helpful for a number of different applications in their diocese or in their parish. And there's just a couple of feedback that we've received of people who have used the tool and what they found it useful for, and kind of drawing on these, how we kind of heard people using the tool and applying it in their context. We've developed some resources to go alongside the tool, which are also helpful in how you interpret the data and some potential next steps. And I'll go on to those slightly later, but handing over now to Ken, who's going to just share a little bit more around the background of how the parish level data is developed.
Thank you, Sophie, and thank you everyone for coming this morning. It's really nice to be here and to see folk in the chat. I'm really grateful to CUF for the work they do on this. I spend a chunk of my time coming up with these numbers for Church of England parishes, and I don't do it for fun. I do it because I want them to be useful for people, and they're only going to be useful for people if they're made available in ways that people can make sense of and access. And I'm, as I say, very grateful for CUF for the work they do on that. I'm going to talk for the next couple of minutes about where the data sets come from and then how I map them onto Church of England parishes. You'll be delighted to know I'm not going to put up pages and pages of formulae and equations, but if you want to see formulae and equations, you've got my email address and we can chat later. So there are two major data sources that go into this information. The first is the National Census 2021, and all the census data that I use is publicly available. I've popped a link on the page here. The people who run the census care very strongly about this information, and they want it to be used by people as well. So they try very hard to make it available in accessible ways. And if you're someone who's interested in demographic information, it's worth exploring the resources that they provide to get census tables at different geographies and different variables, and all sorts of information is made available. It's provided, some of it at national level, some of it at local authority level, some of it at what's called output area level. None of these patches matches Church of England parish boundaries. So that's where I need to do some work to make this into Church of England relevant demographic statistics. And I'll talk a little bit more about how to do that in a moment. Can I have the next slide, please, Amy? Thank you so much. So the other data source that is a particular focus of the lookup tool is the deprivation statistics. And these come out every 4 or 5 years or so. Most recently in 2019, and these are statistics that describe deprivation in a range of different ways, and deprivation is a complicated and multifaceted thing, and there's a lot of complexity within these data sets and a lot of detail within these data sets. You can, if you kind of close your eyes and think about a place and think about what it is that might make it deprived, well, there's the housing, there's the transport, there's the infrastructure, there's poverty, there's crime, there's health. All of these things are an aspect of deprivation, and the indices of deprivation try to quantify those various aspects. They don't do it by going and asking everybody about their circumstances. They're trying to use other data sets as proxies for those various facets of deprivation. And it's probably worth saying at that point then that actually everything in these data sets is an approximation. So it's a sensible approximation from people who know what they're doing, but it's an approximation. There will be cases where the approximation doesn't quite work. And if you think back to the census, actually the 2021 census happened in March 2021, and we were still in pandemic weirdness at that point. It's the situation in March 2021 is not the same as the situation today. People move, houses are built, houses are demolished, there are changes. So it's a point in time and it's an approximation even then. But again, with the deprivation statistics, they do not come out at Church of England parish patches. They come out on patches called lower super output areas, of which there are 32,000 or so in the country, and the boundaries don't match Church of England parishes, because where would the fun be in that? So I need to do some work to turn those into Church of England parish deprivation statistics. Can I have the next slide, please, Amy? Again, if you're interested in this, it's well worth exploring what's available on those deprivation pages. And there's this really nice infographic that I refer to a lot that describes what is in those deprivation stats. And it shows us that deprivation information is made up of income and employment and education and health and crime, housing, living environments, all those things merged together to give an overview of deprivation. But as well as merging them together, they're all available separately too. So if your focus is on crime, you can look at which patches are most deprived in terms of crime. And there are, of course, places where they are deprived by one measure and not deprived by another. And those things are interesting and worth exploring. It's also worth saying at this point that the opposite of deprivation, the opposite of deprived is not deprived. The opposite of deprived isn't wealthy or affluent. So it's not a rich to poor measure, it's deprived to not deprived measure. So you can be not deprived because you're just over the threshold of not being deprived, or you can be not deprived because it's a parish full of billionaires. And the deprivation statistics wouldn't necessarily distinguish between those two. Okay, so those are the data sets that we're working with and that we've presented on the, or rather that friends at CUF have presented on the lookup tool. They are the most up-to-date national stats on these things. There will be updates in future. As far as census stats goes, it'll be quite a while, but there will be updates at some point, no doubt. Next slide, please, Amy. So this is my slide in place of having a load of formulae on a page. Those of you who work with Church of England parishes know that there are 12,000 or so of them, and they are of very varying sizes. There are some enormous parishes covering vast geographical areas. There are some teeny tiny geographical parishes. There are parishes with 20 people living in them. There are parishes with 50,000 people living in them. And you could imagine parishes as the set of parish boundaries as one jigsaw puzzle, and the sets of government patches as another jigsaw puzzle. And what I'm trying to do with the work to map one onto the other is I'm overlaying these jigsaw puzzles and trying to find out what the overlaps are. And essentially, I'm trying to see which government patches fall within which parishes, and it's those government patches data that then get applied to that parish. It's more complicated than that because the boundaries don't align. So there are often cases where the government patch overlaps more than one parish. And then I have to do a little bit more work, which is to try to work out what fraction of the population of that patch sits within each parish that it overlaps. And to do that, I go all the way down to postcode level data. So one of the useful outputs from the census is for every postcode in the country, it tells me how many people are living there. So I know that the 15 people in this postcode, I know where that postcode is, and I know which parish it's in and which lower super output area it is in. And therefore I can assign those 15 people to the right parish lower super output area overlap, which is the basis then for producing all the statistics I come up with. Next slide, please, Amy. So I think I've said this, I'm using postcode level data to assign people to parishes and government patches, and that gives me the overlap, and that overlap gives me the full details, or as much detail as I can get for parish stats. And for those of you who want to know, what I'm coming up with is a weighted average of all the government patches weighted by population. If you want to see all the details, I'm very happy to share them, but I think it's probably not the best use of your time this morning. And I do this in exactly the same way for deprivation data as I do for census data, the only difference being that the patches are different. So the government patches for the census are not the same as the government patches for deprivation, but the principle is the same. And that allows me to come up in the end with statistics, census and deprivation statistics for each of the Church of England parishes covered by the relevant government data sets. So some of you may have noticed that that the deprivation stats don't cover the Channel Islands or Soda and Man, because government deprivation stats don't reach those areas either, nor does the census. And a few of you might be in that quirky bit of the Church of England, which is in fact in Wales. We have 7 parishes that are entirely in Wales, and the deprivation stats don't extend into Wales either. So there's quirks at the edges. The Church of England, as I learn day by day, is full of fascinating quirks that give interesting things to statisticians to deal with. I think that's all I want to say about methodology, but further questions, please do ask. And I think I'm handing back to Sophie now.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, great to hear more about the background of how the data is mapped onto parishes. I always find that really helpful to hear again, particularly with the jigsaw photos. That's really helped me understand a bit more about that process. And yeah, just looking now a little bit further at the new lookup tool resources, which I mentioned earlier. I think the tool was first developed in 2015. And with that kind of feedback we've been receiving from individuals about how they found the data useful, we've looked at how we could really draw that into a resource, share some ways in which people have found the tool useful, looking at some potential next steps. Once you have that data, once you've kind of sense checked that within your parish, how it might be useful to you in the next step. So we have developed the Cuff Lookup Tool resources, which are available as a full download on that page, which has the search bar. So you could type in your parish. On that page as well, if you scroll down, there is a full download of the lookup tool resources, which will be shareable. And I think after this webinar as well, it may be the case, yes, confirmation from Amy that they'll be shared with you also. So you have a copy of those to share and read through. So just looking at the Cuff Lookup Tool resources, there's a bit more information about where the data comes from and how do I interpret it and what it might mean, and full guidance on what is included, what the data might mean for your area, including case studies and top tips for further action. And these are a couple of screenshots just from the resources themselves, which we've tried to make colourful and engaging, and yeah, just kind of bring to life a little bit the data that is included within the tool. Next slide, please, Amy. Thank you. And just looking at also what the data might mean for people living in your parish. So that kind of sense checking that I mentioned previously, we have developed this additional sort of web of poverty graphic, which I think can be really helpful in looking certainly at all the things that in kind of the complexity of poverty that may be inputting into what you're seeing in your local area, what's coming up in the data. I found this graphic in particular to be really helpful in just kind of making more sense of what it is that the data is telling us. So as the resource includes as well, it's important for us not to make generalizations or assumptions and to take time to listen and learn from individuals. And it can be helpful to imagine poverty as a web of interconnecting challenges that significantly impact an individual or a community's ability to thrive. And of course, as kind of individuals and members within your church and parish, I'm sure you have that awareness of what is going on in your local area that may be reflected in the data that you see within the tool. Next slide, please, Amy. Thank you. And yeah, we've kind of taken the time to look at how people have used the lookup tool data, and also what resources we have available as Cuff as next steps, which might be helpful for you, your church and your parish, looking in this part of the resource in how you can use the data, whether it be planning for mission. We have a couple of things that might be helpful with our Growing Good toolkit, and Know Your Church and Know Your Neighbourhood, which some of you may have already been involved with, looking at project planning, some tools here for assistance with and support with project planning, some links to tools, fundraising for community projects, and some resources for other webinars which may help just deepening that understanding of what the lookup tool data shows, what you've experienced in your parish and what that next step may be, and also in prayer for your community, looking at some seasonal resources that we have for prayer and reflection, our prayer walk guide, and also prayer diaries, which we're developing as well, looking at what that next step might be. Is that developing something existing or something new? We try to draw into the resources a lot of different guidance really for extra things that may be helpful in informing that thinking, kind of developing some new ideas, also having chats as well with PCC or members of congregation or representatives within the parish of what might be the next step, informed by that data from the tool, and getting that, broadening that understanding really of things that are going on within your parish. Next slide, please, Amy. Just thinking what's next. Yes, now Amy's just going to hand us over. We have a case study from Matthew Price, who's just going to share a little bit more about his experience with the tool.
Thank you, Sophie. Yeah, so you might be starting to have some ideas now, thank you, Sophie, for that, about how you might be able to use the lookup tool in your church, your community. So we really wanted you to hear from someone in person, well, online in person, who has actually done that, and hopefully spark a few more ideas for you from their experience. So we've got, yes, the Reverend Matthew Price. Thank you so much, Matthew, for coming on the call today to tell us a bit more about what his church did with the tool. So hello, Matthew. I think I saw you here somewhere.
Yeah, hi Amy, I am here.
There you are. Hello, good morning. So can you just start by telling us, where is your church? What's your church like?
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. So I'm vicar of One Church parish on the very east coast of East Anglia in Norfolk, just south of Great Yarmouth, and our parish is almost entirely a 1950s council estate.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the data tool, I know it's 428th most deprived parish in the country out of the 12,000 that we've been hearing about.
Yeah. So why did you choose to use the lookup tool? Where did you hear about that? And why did you use it?
So I can't remember how I first heard about it. It probably was from a cuff email or something. But I think we were really aware that we were working in an area where there were high levels of deprivation, but we wanted to understand a bit more about the dynamics of that and how that particularly affected the people that we were working with. Obviously, as a vicar, you meet people and you get to know anecdotal stories, but actually to have an overview of the data was really, really helpful. So for us, for example, what we discovered as we looked at the results from the lookup tool was that our parish was disproportionately deprived compared to its deprivation in other areas amongst working age poverty. And that was really interesting for us, because actually we think of deprivation often as linked to unemployment, don't we? But actually people that were working were also struggling with issues of deprivation. And one of the things that shocked me most when I looked at the lookup tool was that in our parish, 26, nearly 27% of people adults have no qualifications whatsoever. So that's also helped inform what we've been doing to try and meet some of the needs that we're experiencing in our community.
Great. So you've got all that information from the tool, and then how did you decide what to do with it?
Yeah, so I think two things it's helped us with. The first thing is planning. We heard, didn't we, earlier, just a minute ago, planning for mission, planning for the interventions that we're trying to make in our community. So making sure that what we're trying to do is meeting the needs that the data is telling us exist in our wider community. And we're not just going on anecdotal stories, because that can sometimes skew what you're trying to do. So planning and particularly the interventions we're trying to make. But the other thing that's been really useful for us is we're a very deprived parish. We have lots of people who come to our church on Sunday morning who have no income at all. So parish income is a massive issue for us, and particularly if we want to be involved in reaching out and missions. So we do a lot of grant applications. And anyone that's been involved in grant applications will know that you need a solid evidence base in order to be able to persuade the funder that the need you're trying to meet exists in your community. So the lookup tool has been invaluable for that. And actually it's led us to dive a bit deeper into the deprivation stats as well. So for us, the lookup tool was an introduction, and then we've actually gone a bit deeper into the underlying deprivation stats as well, to really understand what's going on and to provide it, I hope, give a compelling case to donors that what we're trying to do is meeting the need in our community.
Yeah, fantastic. And is there anything you would recommend to all these people here who are thinking about using the lookup tool?
Well, I think whatever your parish context is, it's worth just going on and sticking it into the lookup tool and at least looking at the headline statistics. And I wonder whether that might be worth sharing with your PCC or church leadership teams. I think often congregation members have, if it's not their own experience, have very little idea of what are some of the particular challenges facing members of our wider community. So I think using the tool could be a really good way of educating our PCCs or leadership teams about the particular dynamics in our own communities.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Matthew, for joining us and sharing that. We really appreciate it. I'm going to hand back now to Ken, I believe. No, I'm not. I'm going to hand back to Sophie for a moment to talk about more stories and case studies.
Thanks so much, Amy, and thank you so much, Matthew. It's brilliant to hear about how the lookup tool has been a helpful resource for you and your parish. And this is just a really quick note saying that we would love to hear from you, your experience maybe using the lookup tool, and then also bringing that into your context, informing, maybe it be funding applications, those conversations with PCC, other members of your parish and congregation. Another part of my role is story gathering, and yeah, it's just brilliant really to hear the ways in which that has been useful in different applications, in different contexts. I think when people hear stories, that can be really encouragement, really encouraging for what they're doing in their own parish, and yeah, sharing those with the individuals, the leadership team within their context as well, and kind of evidencing that with a story or a case study of how it's been applied in a context similar or a context very different to their own, I think can be yeah, a massive help in that next step for the tool, and yeah, making the most really of that data and the information available for your parish. So do get in touch. It'll be brilliant to hear from you. I'm going to hand over now to Ken, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the resources that are available that data services have and other variables that, yeah, things they've been working on.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Matthew, thank you for sharing what you've been doing with this data set. That's really interesting too. As I said earlier on, I'm really grateful to CUF for their work on this, but it seems to me that we, with all this information we have, different people need it in different formats and find different things helpful. So what I've tried to do is to make sort of the same information available in a range of different ways. I'm sure none of them is perfect for anybody, and there's probably other things we could do that would be better, and please suggest them if you think of them. But I'm trying to cover as many possible uses as I can. So this is to let you know what else there is that covers much of the same ground in terms of the parish data. If you are a person who loves enormous spreadsheets with millions of numbers in them, you can have enormous spreadsheets with millions of numbers in them. So on our webpage, I have several spreadsheets that contain all these data sets. So there is a spreadsheet that contains the deprivation stats for every parish in the country, and you can download that and use it as suits you. There's another one with census data. There are deanery level data sets as well for the census, and all of those things are available. I share the same things in a couple of other ways as well, which, all being well, I'll try to demonstrate in a moment. One is through an interactive parish map. And the other, which is a bit more visual than, much more visual than spreadsheets, and more accessible, I think, to lots of people, for lots of people. And the other thing I've been working on is putting some of this information into a little census and deprivation parish dashboard. And I'll try to show you a couple of these if I may. So I'm going to try to share my screen and we'll see if that behaves. So bear with me just a second. First place to point you towards is the data services webpage, because this gets you to all of this stuff really. Somewhere on here it says we provide parish level information, and if you click on that you'll find links to all the big, horrible or wonderful spreadsheets depending on your view of spreadsheets. Underneath it there's an interactive parish map, and I'll show you that in just a second. Below the map is a little user guide for working with it. This map is in a bit of software called ArcGIS, which I am not an expert in, but I've dabbled in, and I've learnt to do what I do by clicking buttons and seeing what happens. And I've put some of that experience into the user guide. But it's pretty user friendly, and you can't break it. Well, I don't think you can. So play around with it, and there will be no harm, and you will find things out. I'm going to show you quickly some of the stuff on the interactive map. So I'll click on the link. Hopefully you can see the map popping up on the screen. Sophie, nod if you can see the map appearing. It's getting there, thank you. It takes a little while to load because there's a lot of data within this map. This map shows every Church of England parish, colour-coded by deprivation decile, every church, colour-coded by listed building status, and every school. And you can zoom in and out as you might expect. And if you click on a map, it tells you something about the thing you've clicked on. So as it happens, I'm sitting about here in Walworth, St Christopher, South London, and this little pop-up box contains some census and deprivation information about this parish. And the same is true for any other parish in the country. This might not be displaying as you want it to display. You might not want to color code your parishes by deprivation. You might want to do something else instead. Well, you can. So I'm not going to take you through lots of things here, but if you want to, you can change what this map shows and how it shows it. I will show you one thing very quickly because people often say they find it useful. You can have a map that just shows parish boundaries if you want. You can turn the schools layer on and off. I've also got the local, the lower super output areas mapped here, also color coded by deprivation. So you can see which LSOAs overlap with your parish if you find that interesting. The other nice thing about this lower super output area layer is it shows you something about the range of deprivation within your parish. So let's just scroll down here. You can see this parish, Clapham St James, as it happens, has some dark blue patches which are very deprived, some dark blue LSOAs that are very deprived, and some kind of light yellow coloured which are much less deprived. Within that parish, there's a big range of deprivation. And that's the case in plenty of places, that parish as a whole might be sort of medium deprived, but there are deprived patches and non-deprived patches. And I think that helps inform what you do and how you serve in that parish. So there's plenty you can do to explore with that map, and maybe some of that will come up in the questions later, but the user guide is a good place to start, or just clicking on it and seeing what happens is absolutely fine too. The other thing we've done more recently is to come up with what we've called census and deprivation dashboards, and I'm just going to show you one of those very quickly. And this is the same information, or a subset of it, presented in a slightly different way. And in this case, again, this is the parish I'm sitting in. For a few different census variables, it's comparing the parish with the deanery and the diocese and the national picture. So it's got the parish's age distribution compared to the structures within which we're nested. So we have many fewer older people than nationally. We have slightly higher percentage Christian than our deanery does. Our ethnic group characteristics, and a few other bits and bobs from the census. And down the bottom here is a slightly ugly chart trying to summarize some of the deprivation information for this parish and how it fits in the national picture. And again, you can see we're quite a deprived parish by overall deprivation, but when it comes to local services, we're one of the least deprived parishes in the country, because the buses are just there, and the GP is just there, and the school is there, and the post office is there. We have really good access to local services. We have very little deprivation by that measure, but very high deprivation by other measures. I will stop sharing my screen because I think that's all I wanted to say on this. So we can probably zip back to the slides, Amy, if that's okay. So the kind of take-home point from that is that this information is available in as many ways as I can think of and practically come up with to share it. Please use it in whichever way works for you. If you find things that aren't working for you, please tell me, because if I can improve it, I will. Amy, would you mind just flicking through a couple of slides for me? Thank you. The links to the map are on the slide just there. If you go on to the next slide, we've just put all these census and deprivation dashboards publicly available on the online parish returns system. That's the place where we ask churches, church wardens, clergy to enter their attendance stats in that annual return and their finance stats in that other annual return. And on that site is now all the parish census and deprivation dashboards. Because all this information is already public, it comes from census and deprivation public data sets. Parish boundaries are not secret. We can make these dashboards public as well. There's no need to hide them behind a login because it's all public information. And the more easily we can make these things available, the more useful they are to people, I would think. Next slide, please, Amy. Sorry, next but one. So just to let you know what else might be coming. And Sophie mentioned it right back at the start that currently the data sets are mapped onto parish boundaries from October 2023, so it's a year out of date. The census data set is not going to change anytime soon, nor is the deprivation data set, but parish boundaries change. So there will be cases where your parish is not featured in these data sets because your parish didn't exist in its current form in October 2023. And I will update all of this work and all of those numbers and spreadsheets and so forth as soon as I get the chance. I would like to do it every 6 months or so, but we don't have the staffing levels to make that possible at the moment. So I will do it when I can. And apologies to anyone whose parish is imperfectly or imperfectly represented or entirely missing at the moment. I haven't mapped every single census variable onto parish boundaries, partly because for some of them, the data are just not available at a local enough level to make that work. Things like language, which is fascinating as a census variable, is only available at local authority level, and local authorities are so enormous compared to parishes. It doesn't really make sense to try to come up with parish language stats, so I can't. But there might be other things where I could, and if someone asks me to, I will. But for the time being, I do the things that people tell me they find useful, and I don't have time to do all the things that could be done. But if there's something that you would find useful that you can't find there, please tell me, and I will do it if I can. As I said earlier on, the ONS is great in terms of providing data sets. Don't match parish boundaries, but that might not necessarily matter for your use. Depends what you're doing with it. And we've written a couple of user guides for working with the ONS's resources, which again are on the Data Services webpage. We do our best to make this stuff available. We do our best to help people use it. Whenever we get it wrong, please tell us and we will improve it. And I think that's all I want to say, apart from thank you for your time and Sophie and Amy for organising the session. But now we have questions, so please ask. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ken. Yes, it's time for questions. I think we've had a couple that, because you're both so brilliant, you've already managed to answer, but I'll pose them again just in case anyone didn't catch them. So someone asked, do you know where I can get a physical copy of a map or one that's easy to print out of my C of E parish, which shows the parish boundaries? So Ken, you've just showed us on that ArcGIS that you can add that layer for the parish boundaries, and that might well be enough to kind of screenshot. You can see what the parish looks like. Do you know if there's any other ways of getting? Yeah, Ken.
Well, just on the ArcGIS map, as well as that bit with the parish boundaries, it's got a print function, so you can print that to PDF. You can tweak the base map so that whether it's a street view or other things that are kind of underneath the parishes, there are a few options there, but you can get your parish boundary that way. It's sort of designed to be seen on a screen rather than printed out, but it doesn't seem to come out too badly as a PDF. Having just
Great, thank you. And someone asked about the LSOA table list by numerical code. How do you find the code for your area? Which was also answered, I think.
Yes, sort of answered. So it depends a bit on your area. On the map I showed, if you're after kind of for your house, you could zoom in and find the LSOA that your house sits within. If you're in a geographically big, well, in fact, a parish big by population, LSOAs have about 1,500 people living in them. So if you're if your parish has 15,000 people, you've probably got 10 or so LSOAs. You could click on all of them for your parish to work out which ones they are. But I have a table that is the parish to LSOA lookup table, and I can't see why I shouldn't make it public. So if anyone wants it, let me know and I'll share it.
Wonderful, thank you. And Polly just reminded me that I should say practically on the lookup tool, when you're using that, if you don't know the name of your parish, you can put your postcode into the A Church Near You website. That's A Church Near You. You go on there, you can just put in your postcode and it will tell you what parish you're in, and then you can pop that into the CAF lookup tool. Another question, someone's asked, please can you say something about the source of life expectancy data and how this is mapped to parish boundaries?
Yes, I can say something about the life expectancy. So the life expectancy is something that we're hoping to update as soon as possible. Currently, it's the 2009 to 2013 health expectancies and birth for middle layer super output areas. That's the source of the data. So I can just note that in the chat, but that is something that we are looking to update with the next update of the tool, hoping to do something with the updated parish boundaries, updating the life expectancy data, and also including reintroducing, as they have been in the tool previously, the information for lone parenthood and single occupant households, which Ken has kindly showed me where we can draw those out and include those in the tool. And in terms of mapping life expectancy, Ken, onto the parish boundaries, is there anything different in the way that that's done? I think
it's essentially the same, and apologies, I haven't had a chance to do that bit of work yet, which is why the stuff is from a little while ago. But it's essentially the same method that we have government life expectancy stats on a particular set of patches that we do our best to map sensibly onto parishes. Did you say it was MSOA level, Sophie?
Mm-hmm.
So those are middle super output areas, which are slightly bigger than lower super output areas. I forget how many of them there are in the country. Might be 8,000, something like that. So they're kind of similar kind of size to patches, but will overlap in slightly different ways.
Thank you. We've got one more question to pose, but if anyone's got any more that are coming to mind, there's no such thing as a stupid question, so please do pop it in the chat now, because this is your chance to ask them while Sophie and Ken are here. So one more question. They've said, this information is great. As part of our neighbourhood plan process, we have survey data collected, for example, from shoppers at Co-op who are willing to respond. I wonder how much we should be concerned about selection bias. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, certainly in the resources, we've had a look at other kind of data sets, information locally that's available. I will just pull up one of the pages on the resources, but certainly the information that's around. I think there's a street mapper, some information as well from the police. If you have that kind of local source of information from the Co-op and the work they're doing there, I'd say certainly consider as many of the different resources and data as possible. And I think really that sense checking, looking at what those responses are, considering those in what you're planning, and if you do find them helpful for that next step, I would say consider everything that's available really, and the insight certainly from that survey could be helpful for what you're doing. Ken, did you have?
Well, I think I worry about selection bias with any survey, actually, whether it's a brilliant survey or not. You can check some of that stuff. So with using some of the demographic stats that are available. So because we publish the numbers, what fraction of your parish population is male and female, say, and what fraction are aged over 65 or whatever it is. And you can at least start to compare your respondents to your surveys with the demographic information that is available. If you know half your parish population is aged under 30, but there are no people aged under 30 who've answered your survey, well, that might be a bit of a worry. But the thing that worries me more about selection bias stuff with surveys is the things you can't check against known demographics. So if you're you're asking about people's attitudes to something. There is no way of knowing whether the people that answer your survey are the people are more likely to have a positive attitude or a negative attitude. You don't know which people choose to engage with the survey. And I fret about that all the time, but I fret about it with every single survey, which means probably you just have to be sensible and aware. I don't see any other way forward with that, but just kind of be alert to the fact that if you're, say, standing outside Co-op in a cassock and dog collar, some people will choose to engage with you and some people will choose not to, and that might not be a fair sample of the people you're trying to engage with. You probably know that already.
Thanks, Ken. Andrew, did you want to say something on that?
Yeah, Ken, that's a very helpful idea to compare the census data, for example, with the stuff that we get from this type of surveys, because I have friends and neighbors who are very keen on kind of doing an impromptu survey, and I think we have a tendency to get the kind of answers that the questions suggest, in particular in relation to where we locate the survey and who responds. And I think perhaps we should be a bit more careful about that, because I think it undermines the validity of the data.
Thank you, Andrew. Great. Okay. Oh, one more question that's come through. We'll answer that one very quickly. Is there any info at parish level on disability and or neurodivergence? Do either of you know about any data on those things?
Off the top of my head, I don't. There's definitely health data in the census. I don't recall seeing anything specifically on neurodivergence, but I may just have missed it. I'm pretty sure I mapped some of the health stuff onto parish boundaries, and if you just answer other questions while I have a quick look, and I'll come back to you if that's okay.
Absolutely fine.
Yeah, just noting, Ken, that I think it is the health data at parish boundaries, which I've shared with people before. That's self-reported health in the 2021 census. But yes, with particular link to disability or neurodivergence, that's something that I can take away and have a look at and get back to you, and if helpful at all, seeing what's available.
Thank you, that would be great.
Thank you, Sophie. And do you want to pop your email address in the chat, and Sophie can take that and then she'll be able to get back to you on that. Thank you. Okay. And while you're doing that, if you're still doing that, I was just going to tell you about this final session we have coming up in this series of 3 online webinars. So this last one is going to be on Wednesday, the 20th of November, and it's going to be called Extending the Table, Generosity in Our Communities. So we've got some fantastic speakers coming to this. We've got Ray Gaston, you might know that name. You might also know the name Nigel Adams, and they're going to be exploring how we can all make space to show God's love to more people through our churches. It's open to all and it's free again, like this one. So do feel free to share it with anyone who might be interested. In the email, you should get that in a few days. You will have the recording from today's session. You'll have the slides, which will have all those links, because I'm aware there's a lot of different websites and things we've talked about this morning. They will all be in the slides that I will send around to you via email. And also, yeah, the CUF lookup tool itself, the new resources around the lookup tool will all be in there. So don't worry if you haven't had a chance to note everything down. It will be coming to you in your inbox at some point in the next few days. Otherwise, I'd like to say a huge thank you to both Ken and Sophie, and also Matthew for sharing this morning. Thank you very much to all of you. There's been a lot of information, some fascinating stuff there, and I really hope that's been useful to you each in some way as you work in your churches and your communities. In the meantime, don't hesitate to get in touch via me or via the CUF website if you have any other questions that come to mind as you think about what you've heard this morning. Otherwise, have a lovely rest of your day, everyone, and thank you for coming. Bye, everyone.